curriculum implementation and change. Introduction. This unit focuses on the definition of curriculum implementation, curriculum change and curriculum evaluation, curriculum implementation process, factors that affect curriculum implementation, types of curriculum change and resistance factors for curriculum change. It also deals with the historical development of Ethiopia education. The core areas of discussion embrace indigenous education, religious education, the introduction of modern education and its characteristics, as well as the new education and training policy of Ethiopia. Learning outcomes. After successful study of this unit, you will be able to define the concepts curriculum implementation, change, and evaluation. Assess the factors that affect curriculum implementation. Elaborate why some people resist during curriculum change. Evaluate the quality of primary school textbooks in your major area. Compare indigenous education and religious education. Evaluate the contribution of church education in the historical development of the Ethiopian society. Identify the major levels of Quranic education. Discuss the force structure of church education. List the methods of teaching used by religious institutions. Demonstrate the implication of religious education to modern education. Definition. Curriculum implementation is a process of putting change into practice. Implementation in curriculum involves changing the status quo by accepting and utilizing a newly created curriculum or part of a curriculum. That is, taking a curriculum document as devised in the development phase of the model and putting it into practice. If the curriculum is accepted and utilized successfully, we say that it has become institutionalized. Change is the process of transforming phenomena into something different. Therefore, curriculum change can be defined as any alteration in the aspects of curriculum such as educational philosophy, values, objectives, organizational structures and material, teaching strategies, student experiences, assessment and learning outcomes. Curriculum implementation process. In the short term, any newly implemented curriculum will be expected to experience some difficulties. To a large degree, this will reflect the effectiveness of the curriculum developers in meeting the need of the curriculum's clients. Thus, implementation is a short-term phenomenon that attempts to integrate the new curriculum into existing practice. To some degree, the problems experienced in implementing curricula reside with the lack of systematic implementation procedures. For any new curriculum to be implemented, it required an educational institution to change. It is important for teachers to know that a new curriculum can be implemented more successfully in a school when cognizance and action are taken on the following points. A deliberate strategy is developed to implement the curriculum in the school. The curriculum is presented in terms of its favorable characteristics. Support is obtained at a systematic level for the innovation. The characteristics of the school are disposed towards the innovation. The implementation process to be successful, it needs to consider planning, communication, cooperation and support. Different approaches of curriculum implementation are suggested by scholars. However, they can be summarized into three models. They are the Fidelity model, mutual adaptation model and enactment model. The Fidelity Perspective. This is the best known approach to curriculum implementation. Its main intent is to determine the degree of implementation of an innovation in terms of the extent to which actual use of the innovation corresponds to intended or planned use, and to determine factors which facilitate and inhibit such implementation. Most of the curriculum implementation studies have adopted this approach. Research has focused on measuring the degree to which a particular innovation is implemented as planned, and identifying hindering or supportive factors. The central assumption is that the desired outcome of curricular change is classroom behavior that is faithfully replicates, shows fidelity to, the original plan. However, underlying this perspective are other assumptions about curriculum knowledge, change, and the role of the teacher. The experts, who design and develop the curriculum innovation, see curriculum knowledge as being unmanly, created outside the classroom. Change is conceived of as a linear process, with teachers as the classroom implementers of the innovations developed elsewhere. The curriculum is evaluated to determine whether the planned outcomes have been achieved. Implementation is successful when the teachers carry out the curricular change as directed. If they do carry out the plan as intended, then the curricular change itself can be fairly evaluated. If they do not implement the innovation correctly or fully, then the change cannot be fairly evaluated because it was never really implemented. Mutual adaptation perspective. Since we have chosen to organize our review of curriculum implementation by examining fidelity, mutual adaptation, and enactment approaches, logic suggests that we have in mind a continuum of research. In such a continuum, mutual adaptation might represent a midpoint along a line that moves from complete fidelity in implementation of curriculum to a polar opposite, curriculum enactment. The definition of mutual adaptation further suggests the notion of points along a continuum of implementation. Mutual adaptation is the process whereby adjustments in curriculum developers and who actually use it in the school or classroom context. This implies a certain amount of negotiation and flexibility on the part of both designers and practitioners. We are reluctant to speak of mutual adaptation research as representing a point or points along a continuum, however. People holding the fidelity perspective is interested in measuring the degree to which a particular innovation is implemented as planned. Researchers adopting a mutual adaptation perspective, on the other hand, are seen to be committed to 1. Using new methodologies and theories from the social sciences to discover problems of education. And 2. Identifying factors which facilitate or hinder implementation as planned, especially organizational variables. For this reason, it is perhaps helpful to see mutual adaptation research as something in its own right, rather than a midpoint on a continuum. Curriculum enactment perspective. Though studies are sparse when compared to research using the fidelity and mutual adaptation perspectives, there is also a curriculum enactment research tradition. From the enactment perspective, student and teacher view curriculum as the education experiences jointly created. The externally created curricular materials and programmed instructional strategies focused on in the fidelity and mutual adaptation perspectives are seen here as tools for students and teacher to use as they construct the enacted experience of the classroom. You can see that underlying this perspective are assumptions about curriculum knowledge, the change process, and the role of the teacher that are different from the other two traditions. Curriculum knowledge is seen as something constructed by the individual learner, but which must answer to both personal and external standards. The mind is seen as a fire to be kindled rather than as a vessel to be filled by the knowledge of external experts. change is viewed not merely as observable alterations in behavior but rather as a personal developmental process, both for the teacher and student. Thus, successful implementation, or a process of personal, developmental change, demands the understanding and acceptance of the subjective realities of those undergoing the change. The role of the teacher, then, is that of a curriculum developer who, together with his or her students, grows ever more competent in constructing positive educational experiences. The process of the enacted curriculum is one of continual grow 1H for both teachers and student. If the mind is a fire to be kindled, the role of the external curriculum expert is a teacher of teachers, one who kindles the fire of teachers who then join their fire with those of their students, thus continually adding to the flame. Factors affecting curriculum implementation. Factors related with the characteristics of the change. Need and relevance. Need and relevance refers to the perceived need to the part of implementers. It would seem that the greater the recognized need for change, the greater the degree of implementation. Clarity refers to understanding of goals and means of an innovation by users. The greater the understanding of goals and what is to be gained from their adoption, the greater the degree of implementation. Complexity has to do with the difficulty and extent of change required of users. The greater the complexity in innovations with differentiated components incrementally introduced, the greater the degree of implementation. Quality and practicality of program refers to the quality and availability of materials. Users must perceive that materials are going to meet important needs as well as be practical and usable. Unavailability of required materials act as inhibitors of implementation. Factors related with the characteristics of the school district level. Previous history of innovation attempts. The more positive the previous history with innovation, the greater the degree of implementation. The adoption process. The higher the quality of planning to meet problems, the greater the degree of implementation. Administrative support. The greater the real administrative support, the greater the degree of implementation. Staff development and participation. The greater the quality and quantity of sustained interaction and staff development, the greater the degree of implementation. Timeline and information systems or evaluation. The greater the extent to which timing or events is guided by an understanding of implementation, the greater the degree of implementation. The greater the linkage between evaluation data and school or class level improvement needs, the greater the degree of implementation. Board and community characteristics. The greater the board and community interest and support without controversy, the greater the degree of implementation. School-level factors. The role of the principal. The greater the active support of the principal, the greater the degree of implementation. Teacher-teacher relationship. The more collegiality, trust, support, interaction and open communication between teachers, the greater the degree of implementation. Teacher characteristics and orientations. The greater the sense of teacher efficacy, the greater the degree of implementation. External environment factors. Government agencies. The greater the congruence between local needs and the reform and the greater awareness of subjective realities, the greater the degree of implementation. External assistance. The greater the interaction with local district, the greater the degree of implementation. As a whole, curriculum implementation can be affected by the following variables: the nature of the curriculum itself, the situation of the learners, the professional competence of the teacher, availability of resources, the school environment, the out-of-school environment, the school-community relationship. The management practices in the school. Curriculum change. Change is a phenomenon which we experience continuously. Daily, it seems features of our society are changing. Indeed, some changes are so frequent and substantial that we may find them difficult to keep abreast with these developments. So it is with schooling and education. Substantive and frequent change appears to have become something of a norm, a continuing reality of schools. Curriculum change may be considered as a subset of educational change and as such is affected by the same type of factors affecting change within education in general. Much of curriculum is concerned with planned change, which may be defined as a deliberate and collaborative process involving a change agent and a client system which are brought together to solve a problem or more generally, to plan and attain an improved state of functioning and applying valid knowledge. Most of what we address in curriculum is some form of planned change. Change typologies in curriculum. Some educators classify changes into different types. Warren Bennis has identified the following types of changes. Planned change. It is a change in which those involved have equal power and function in a prescribed fashion. People identify and follow precise procedures for dealing with the activity at hand. Planned change is taken to be an ideal one. Coercion. One group determining the goals and intentionally excluding others from participating characterizes this type of change. The group in control has the major power and works to maintain the unequal power balance. Interaction change. In this type of change, mutual goal setting and fairly equal power distribution among groups take place. But those involved often lack deliberateness of effort. They are uncertain how to follow through with the plans of development and implementation. Changes have also been classified according to their complexity. John McNeill has identified 5 types of changes as described below. Substitution. This depicts alteration in which one element is replaced for another. By far, this is the easiest and most common type of change. Alteration. This type of change exists when someone introduces into the existing materials program new content, items, materials, or procedures that appear to be only minor and thus are likely to be adopted readily. Perturbations. These changes could first disrupt a program, but can then be adjusted purposefully by the curriculum leader to the ongoing program within a short time span. Restructuring. These changes led to modification of the system itself, that is, of the school or school district. New concepts of teaching roles such as differentiated staffing or team teaching would be a restructuring type of change. Value orientation change. These are shifts in the participants' fundamental philosophies or curriculum orientations. Major power brokers of the school or participation in the curriculum must accept and strive for this level of change for it occurs. However, if teachers do not adjust their value domains, any changes enacted are most likely going to be short-lived. Although the change that occurs in the schools cannot be fit into precise categories, curricularists need to realize that types do exist and that planned change could be an ideal one. Activity 1. What do you understand by the phrase change typology? 2. Discuss the difference among planned, coercion and interaction changes. 3. Identify changes that are classified based on complexity and rearrange them either from the least to the most complex or from the most to the least complex. Resistance to curriculum change. People are the key to curriculum implementation effort, but not always are people ready to accept curriculum change. The people's resistance to change can be attributed to various factors. A. Inertia. Many people think it is easier to keep things as they are. Wanting to keep things as they exist is often mixed with believing that things do not need to be changed or that change being suggested is unwise and will thus be unproductive in meeting the objectives of the school. B. Insecurity. People feel instantly about the uncertainty of things to happen. Those who are comfortable with the present are reluctant to change for a future which they cannot comprehend or see clearly. They prefer to stay with certain known deficiencies than venture forth to uncertain futures, even if the changes most likely would be improvements. C. Rapidity of change. This refers to the factor which makes people to resist change by anticipating another change in curriculum soon. Many people feel that if something is implemented this year, it will most likely be abandoned when another innovation appears, and this will thus make all their efforts useless. D. Lack of knowledge. Sometimes people resist innovation and its implementation because they lack knowledge. They either do not know about the innovation at all or they have little information about it. E. Lack of support. People also resist change if financial or time support is not given to the effort. Resistance to change is sometimes perceived as good, because it calls upon the change agents to think carefully about the innovations and to consider the human dynamics involved in implementing programs. Activity. Do you think that all people resist or accept curriculum change? Why? Discuss the reason. Improving receptivity to curriculum change. Curriculum implementation requires face-to-face interaction or person-to-person contact. It is also a group process involving individuals working together. Not only does the group enable certain actions to occur, it also serves to change its individual members. Curriculum leaders can also increase the person's willingness to change by linking the need and expectations of the individuals with those of the organizations. The following guidelines help individuals to increase their receptivity to curriculum innovations. Curriculum activity must be cooperative. If any program is to be implemented and institutionalized, it should be perceived by all parties as their program. This sense of ownership is achieved by involving people directly and indirectly with the major aspects of curriculum development and implementation. Consider, as some people do not like change, resistance to any new idea is often natural. Curriculum leaders should anticipate it, and should prepare procedures for dealing with it. They must also identify well in advance of the action questions that will arise about the innovation being implemented. How will people feel about the change? What worries will people have? What are some likely points of conflict? What can be done to lessen the anxiety levels of individuals who will be affected by the change? Innovations are subject to change. Nothing should be viewed as permanent. A new curriculum is presented as a response to a particular time. Sometimes even new programs will be required. Change is a constant, and people need to realize that all programs will be constantly reviewed to determine if they should be continued. Proper timing. It is a key increase people's receptivity to an innovation. If the school community is demanding that a new program to be created to respond to a perceived national need, then a new program addressing that need is likely to meet with success and acceptance. Activity. Explain the guidelines suggested by Bruce Joyce and his co-workers and try to suggest some others that can improve people's receptivity to curriculum change. Curriculum evaluation. Evaluation is a term used in educational decisions, and it is taken as one of the important steps of curriculum development. New curricula are being developed on every hand. These curricula have to be evaluated to understand the success and failure of the educational plan and to see whether the design curriculum is effective or ineffective in the implementation process. Meaning of evaluation: evaluation is a process that helps the planners or other concerned authorities to see the difference between what is intended or expected and how much is accomplished. In doing so, it provides valid and reliable information that could help to decide about the failure or success of an educational program. Activity 1. Define the term evaluation in relation to curriculum. 2. How do you know whether the newly designed curriculum is effective or not? Discuss in group. 3. List the possible purpose of evaluation. What is the use of evaluation in relation to a curriculum document? Discuss in group. The purpose of evaluation. Modern educational evaluation began with the work of Ralph Tyler in 1930s by asking random questions to learners about the contents of their courses. In his works, Tyler showed the importance of evaluation in education, promoting the idea that evaluation is necessary to see whether the educational objectives are mastered. In this view, evaluation process doesn't only be conducted after implementing the plan, but it starts when the planner checks learning experiences against various criteria derived from educational psychology and general principles of learning and from practical experience, and when these learning experiences have been checked to see that how much they are related to the objectives. Hence, the importance of curriculum evaluation is to make a more inclusive check as to whether the plan or choice for learning experiences actually function to guide the teacher in producing the sort of outcomes desired. In addition, it assesses the curriculum development and the appropriateness in relation to the educational goals. It also helps to check the validity of the basic hypothesis upon which the effectiveness of the particular instruments being used in the implementation process. Generally, from Tyler's practices of curriculum evaluation, we can understand that the process makes possible to note in what aspects the purpose for curriculum evaluation and the reason why a process of evaluation is necessary after the plans themselves are developed. For this, Tyler was called the father of modern program evaluation. The importance and the function of evaluation in helping the planner to see whether the educational plans developed for learning experiences practically function to guide teachers in showing clear objectives and appropriate means to achieve them. In addition to this, evaluation is regarded as having functions to achieve them. In addition to this, evaluation is regarded as having functions to identify the strengths and weakness of the plan and to find out how far a curriculum is effective and in what respect it needs modification. Therefore, in the evaluation process, data are gathered and interpreted for the sake of deciding on the modification of the program after answering these questions. The curriculum should be judged in relation to the culture of the society it is serving. In general, evaluation can be done for the following purposes. Evaluation provides information to improve curricula. Effective data collected during a unit of study will provide the basis for changes that will make the curriculum more effective in meeting objectives. Provides useful information to curriculum developers to clarify the stated objectives. Feedback obtained through evaluative procedures indicates how realistic and effective the original objectives were and where change is required. Those interested in how well students, parents, educational systems, employers, universities, development planners, and so forth, need constructive information on student performance to enhance their decision-making effectiveness. Curriculum developers should ensure that provision is made for evaluative information that is meaningful and valid. It enables to see what has been achieved, impact evaluation. It is used to document what has been done and what progress has been made, process or implementation evaluation. Used to determine cost-benefit accountability for expenditures. Used to share experiences, professional development. Used to determine the effectiveness of a program in light of the attainment preset priorities and goals. Therefore, evaluation can be undertaken for one or more purposes listed above. Evaluation procedures to be followed. Evaluation procedure could be devised in accordance with the educational level it is meant to check. It could be organized to evaluate total educational program or a given curriculum or certain instruction. Anyhow, the purpose of evaluating total educational program is to find out its validity to the society it is planned. To do so, it requires substantial judgment, and this substantial judgment could be achieved if the following steps are followed as evaluation procedures. Step 1. Identifying the objective. The process of evaluation begins with the identification of educational objectives. Since the main task of evaluation is to see how far the objectives are achieved, they have to be clearly defined in order to have a clear conception of the sort of behavior implied by them. Unless it is clearly defined, the evaluator cannot tell what kind of behavior to look for in the students in order to see to what degree these objectives are being realized. Step 2. Identifying the situations. This step refers to the identification of the situations which will give the student the chance to express the behavior that is implied by the educational objectives. We must find situations that give opportunity to the learners to acquire the expected types of behavior. For example, if we're looking for the evidences of development of interest, situations giving the opportunity for free choice of activity have to be provided. Generally, Tyler asks that evaluation situation is the kind of situation that gives an opportunity for the students to express the type of behavior we are trying to appraise. Step 3. Establishing evaluation instruments. Here, we identify particular tests and examine them to see how far they fit into the type of objectives that are to appraised and how far they agree to the learning situations meant to produce the expected behavior. Types of evaluation. There are 3 major types of curriculum evaluation. These are formative evaluation, diagnostic evaluation and summative evaluation. Formative evaluation is undertaken to improve an existing program. Hence, this evaluation must provide frequently detailed and specific information to guide the program being developed. However, this does not mean that formative evaluation is only used at the implementation stage. Formative evaluation can be used at each of the 3 stages of program development: planning, designing, disseminating it to other users and implementing the program. Diagnostic evaluation is directed towards 2 purposes: either for placement of students properly at the outset of the instructional period, such as secondary school, or to discover the underlying cause of deficiencies in student learning as instruction unfolds. The essential feature of diagnostic evaluation, therefore, is to provide useful information on student performance in order to address a problem. It can be conducted before commencing a unit of learning and during instruction when a student reveals repeated inability to profit from the learning experiences. Summative evaluation is concerned with evaluating the overall program after it is in operation. Summative evaluation is often based on tests of all sorts: students' reaction to the instruction, teachers' view concerning the effectiveness of instruction, parents' reaction, employer ratings of graduates, and reports from college examination bureau, etc. Criteria for curriculum evaluation: establishing evaluation instruments should be based on the following evaluation criteria. Activity: discuss in detail how the criteria of curriculum evaluation can be applied to evaluate a curriculum document. At the time of discussion, use your own examples. Major criteria used in textbook evaluation: element, criteria, explanation, content significance, the importance of the content to the discipline, validity, relationship to the intended objective, accurately, truthfulness, social relevance, timeliness, social development of the individual, utility, the relevance of content to prepare the learner to the adult life, learnability, difficulty level of the content in relation to the student's interest, develop students' eagerness to learn the contents, element, criteria, explanation, activities, validity, appropriateness, angriness to achieve the objective stated, learner appropriateness, relation to students' interest, abilities and level of development, resources, availability of materials, for example computer, laboratory equipments, reference materials, etc., variety, students learn at different rates and in different ways, scope, broad enough to achieve all statements of objectives, element, criteria, explanation, organization of contents and learning experiences, continuity, repetition of desired contents and learning experiences at various stages of learning, sequence, progression from simple to complex, horizontal relation, degree of relationship among the contents and experiences in different subjects which facilitate transfer of learning, element, criteria, explanation, exercises, validity, repetition of stated objectives, relevance, appropriateness to students' development level and experiences, continuity, useful for both to modify the purpose of learning and provide feedbacks for students. Scope, coverage, compatibility, reflect the relative emphasis on intended objectives. Objectively, the information revealed through the evaluation must be dependable. Participation, enable students to involve in the process of learning, element, criteria, explanation, illustrations, validity, relation to the content it represents, simplify, easiness to understand, attractiveness, the quality of the drawing, the color combination. Teachers and curriculum relationship. Clearly, teachers participate in a multiplicity of curriculum activities at a classroom level. These are very substance of their daily teaching tasks and include such activities as selection of specific content, selection of teaching strategies, and use of audio-visual media and so on. In recent years, teachers are participating more in curriculum decision-making at the school level. The nature of this participation may be seen in the various roles that teachers adopt in the decision-making process. It is suggested curriculum decision-making roles at the school level. These are as implementers, adopters, developers, researchers and evaluators. As implementer or receiver, the teacher's role is to apply curriculum developed elsewhere. Most curriculum writers specializing in curriculum change would argue that teacher support is essential for the effective implementation of any curriculum innovation. Alternatively, the teacher could adopt the role of adapter or modifier. Here, An externally developed curriculum is interpreted and changed to meet the needs of a particular school population. This modification has occurred because teachers on the school staff perceive that the curriculum concerned does not adequately meet the needs of their students. The curriculum developer role involves the teacher in designing and developing, usually as a member of a group, a curriculum to meet student needs. Through the use of techniques such as situational analysis and needs assessment, teachers are able to determine the nature of students' needs. Using this database, they are able to develop an appropriate curriculum to meet those needs. Finally, teachers may undertake the role of curriculum researcher. Here, the staff may be involved in improving one's own practice, testing curriculum materials, evaluating new curricula, testing teaching strategies and collecting data on student needs. Teachers can conduct action research. Thus, from the above 2 points of view, there is an intimate relationship and interdependence between the professional teacher and the curriculum. Activity 1. Discuss in group about the existing relationship between primary school teachers and curriculum. 2. List the major duties of teachers in relation to curriculum. 3. What are the advantages of curriculum to teacher? Discuss in group and present your results to the class. Trends of curriculum development in Ethiopia. This mainly deals with the historical development of Ethiopia education. The core areas of discussion embrace indigenous education, religious education, the introduction of modern education and its characteristics, as well as the new education and training policy of Ethiopia. You are recommended to think critically about the contribution of traditional education in the socio-economic development of Ethiopia. Traditional education. Activity 1. What is the difference between indigenous education and religious education? 2. When was the introduction of modern education to Ethiopia? Traditional education has played a great role in the development of modern education and on the transmission of cultural heritage to the new generation. In this regard, Ethiopia has a long and rich history of traditional education. A detailed discussion about this issue is presented hereunder. Indigenous education is a system of education which is offered by all ethnic and linguistic groups with the aim of conveying cultural elements to the young generation. In other words, it plays a crucial role in equipping the children with the attitude and skills which are appropriate for male and female social roles, based on cultural values. Indigenous education gives due attention to the concrete problems of local communities. It also serves as a source of political leaders and ordinary farmers from within the community. The Ethiopian nations and nationalities do have various mechanisms of implementing the indigenous education so as to create members of the community who respect cultural values. Activity 1. Identify concrete examples about indigenous education from the nations and nationalities of Ethiopia. 2. What are the major merits in indigenous education? Religious education, it encompasses church education and quatrains education. These types of religious education are treated in the following manner. Church education, according to various sources, Christianity has been introduced to Ethiopia by a pope called Frumentius from Egypt, Alexandria in 4th century, Abba Salama Kasate Berhane, 330 Ethiopian calendar. During this period, King Ezana was in power at Exum. He was primarily baptized by Abba Salama Kasate Berhane. Due to this reason, Ezana is assumed to be the first Christian king in Ethiopia. According to World Bank, 1988, the Church education has founded a comprehensive system of education that provided and under planning for Ethiopian cultural, spiritual, literary, scientific and artistic life. As mentioned by Teshomagor, 1979, the primary purpose of the Ethiopian church education was to prepare young men for church services such as deacons and priests. Church education has also served as the main route of the following civil servants: judges, governors, scribes, treasurers and general administrators. Church education has four major structures, levels. These are: 1. Nababet is the first level of the Orthodox Church education. It has four sub-levels as elaborated below. A. Fidel Bet. Here, the students are expected to master the 27 alphabets. B. Apostle, Abugida. The student starts reading the first verse of St. John. The students are also being to develop writing skills. C. Acts of the Apostle. Here, the students are expected to read loudly the Acts of the Apostle. The task of the teacher is to clarify the idea. D. DeWitt Bet. The students, here, are expected to mediate the contents of the DeWitt. The students also develop the skill to how to write a letter. 2. Zima Bet. The following contents are included at this stage: church music, song, dancing, playing, beating of time and Samdegwa. The Zimabit takes 7 years for graduation. 3. Kimbet. Here, the students began to study G's language. Learning takes place through group discussion and criticisms of compositions of a given theme, topic. Some of the activities, content, include here are: G's grammar, translation of G's text into Amharic and composition of verse. 4. Michafbet implies higher education. There are 4 areas of specialization. These are: the Old Testament, the New Testament, dogma and philosophy, and astronomy, astrology. Though it is usual to specialize in one of the above-mentioned areas, there are scholars who specialized in 2, 3 or even 4. Any person who has succeeded in specializing the 4 areas is called as the 4-eyed. Quranic Islamic education, according to Marcosis, 1994-156, Quranic education was introduced to Ethiopia during the 7th century. Arab culture and faith were adapted in most of the southern and southeast Ethiopia. Yalu, 1989, has mentioned that the Operation Islamic education was confirmed to the centers of faith due lack of the church. Like that of church education, the Quranic education has 4 phases structures as discussed hereunder. Mali Quran, at this phase, the students study the Arabic alphabets. They start writing on a wooden tablet known as Lo. The following 3 aims are expected to be implemented. These are: learning Arabic letters, reading Quran and recitation of prayers. Fiqh is the second phase where students learn about Islamic laws. The contents to be covered are: religious, political and civic life. Nahawila is also called as the grammar school. The expected major contents are enumerated hereunder: Arabic terminology, Arabic grammatical rules and usage, sentence construction, meaning and usage of Quranic terminology. Tafsir Quran, tafsir means reparation, commentary particular on Quranic and the Sakt books. Here, the students learn and practice the translation of Quranic literature into vernacular languages. Development of modern education in Ethiopia. The history of Ethiopia education before the 20th century, Western education was introduced into Ethiopia through Portuguese missionaries, starting from the 16th century. The first group of missionaries was Portuguese Jesuit missionaries. They opened Catholic schools and taught reading, writing, arithmetic and the Catholic faith. The students were taught to read and write both in Amharic and Portuguese. In 1632 the Portuguese missionaries were expelled from Ethiopia. The years from 1632 to 1769 were a period of isolation, and as a result no missionary was allowed to enter Ethiopia. Fear of Jesuit intervention was a factor in creating a climate or isolation. This fear kept Ethiopia badly closed to missionary activities for over a century. With the opening of the Suez Canal, 1869, the 19th century marked the coming of many Protestant and Catholic missionaries. They engaged in certain amount of teaching. Books were translated into Ge'ez and Amharic. Secular books like spelling and reading books, geography and history books were translated. Secular books are books pertaining to worldly things or things that are not regarded as religious, spiritual, or sacred. Missionaries like Eisenberg and Krapf, 1830, the Lazarist Father from Italy, 1847, and the Swedish Evangelical Mission had organized some schools in Ethiopia. Increasing foreign contacts in the 19th century resulted in sending some Ethiopians to abroad countries like to France, India, England, Rome, etc. They were sent for religious studies. Tewodros II, 1855–1868, was highly interested to introduce Western civilization and education. But because of misunderstanding, Tewodros imprisoned the missionaries. This led grave conflict with the British, which precipitated the Battle of Maquedella. Missionaries were welcomed during the regime of Menelik II and schools began educational works. The government confined the Coptic Church had not strongly extended its educational influence. The aim of mission education was to convert the student or to qualify him for the conservation or others. Generally, the objectives of the missionaries were religious. By 1935, it was reported that 43 mission schools operated by commission organizations were in existence in Ethiopia, again by UAL, 1999–2000. The development of modern education during the 20th century, activity. Why do you think the introduction of modern education to Ethiopia was failed before the 20th century? Explain briefly by considering the objective reality of the then Ethiopia. It is appropriate to trance the historical background of modern education in Ethiopia so as to understand how it went about at various phases as whole. The victory of Advod, 1896, and the foundation of Addis Ababa have witnessed new developments. According to Tugen, al. 1999–2000, the historical development of modern education from French period to the Derge period is discussed in detail as follows. French influence, 1906–1935. The first modern government school was opened in 1906 in Addis Ababa. The name of the school is Menelik II Primary School. The second modern government school, which was opened in 1925 in Addis, is said to be Teferi Mokonnen. The expansion of modern schools also continued to Harm, Desi, and Koba, Jima, Debre Marcos, Gondar, Awassa. Egyptian Coptic teachers were used. The schools served for teaching languages such as French, English, Italian and Arabic. The medium of instruction was French language because its dominant influence. In other words, Ethiopia had adopted the French system of education. Elementary students had annually to sit at the French legation for French government examination of competence. Many students were sent to colleges in Marseille, French. By 1935, there were 21 government schools on function with a total enrollment of 4,200 students. Daribs Adufara, Tor, 1990, have pointed out that modern education officially commenced in 1908, marking a significant step in the history of education in Ethiopia. Italian influence, 1936 to 1941, during the Italian invasion all schools were closed. The buildings in some cases were used for Italian troops and later taken over for Italian children. The pre-war education system was changed. Education during the Italian War political in nature. The Italians were interested to build up the youth with education centered on their political ideology. During this period, the native education was restricted to elementary schools. The curriculum was designed to train people who handled manual labor and also to foster loyalty to the Italian government. This instructional process focused on the following areas: language, agriculture and crafts. British influence, 1941 to 1952. In 1941, Ethiopia regained its independence with the help of Great Britain. The end of the war ushered in a new educational era. The main concentration was the production of teachers and various personnel for the state machinery. This was done mainly with British assistance, during which English became the medium of instruction. In 1943 the first secondary school was inaugurated and teacher training schools were opened. The curriculum, the structure and textbooks used were that of British East Africa, and students were prepared for the London Certificate Examination, GCE. American influence, 1952 to 1974, the primary, junior, and senior secondary structure was adopted in 1962 and Amharic replaced English as medium of instruction up to grade 6. Attempts to produce national curriculum and to expand primary education were made. Secondary schools were opened in provincial capital and regions. A national university called Haile Selassie University College, the present Addis Ababa University, 6 Kilo campus, was opened in 1957 and higher education system began to develop thereafter. A low-cost teacher supply was organized by the Ethiopian University Service, which imposed 1 year's teaching in secondary schools. However, in 1961 UNESCO-sponsored Conference on Education in Africa, which took place in Addis Ababa, revealed Ethiopians' poor educational progress. The dramatic expansion of education notwithstanding, Ethiopia was very far from meeting the target of universal primary education set up by the Conference on African Education. By 1974, primary education was accessible to only 12% of the primary school's age population. The Derge, military, period, 1974 to 1991, the Derge regime influence began in 1974. The education system was under the influence of the Soviet Union. An attempt was made to establish a socialist education system. To this effect, curriculum was developed and textbooks were prepared. The attention of teachers and students was directed to political and propaganda activities. During this period, quality education deteriorated. The new Education and Training Policy, 1991-2, Activity 1. What are the major elements contained in the new Education and Training Policy document of Ethiopia? 2. List the core reasons for launching the new Education and Training Policy of Ethiopia. Education is a process by which man transmits his experiences, new findings and values accumulated over the years, in this struggle for survival and development, through generation. Education enables individuals and society to make all-rounded participation in the development process by acquiring knowledge, ability, skills and attitudes. One of the aims of education is to strengthen the individual's and society's problem-solving capacity, ability and culture starting from basic education and at all levels. Education enables man to identify harmful traditions and replace them by useful ones. It helps man to improve, change, as well as develop and conserve his environment for the purpose of an all-rounded development by diffusing science and technology into the society. Education also plays a role in the promotion of respect for human rights and democratic values, creating the condition for quality mutual understanding and cooperation among people. Education does not operate in isolation. Rather, it has to be integrated with research, practice and development to contribute towards an all-rounded development of society. To date, it is known that our country's education was entangled with complete problems of relevance, quality, accessibility and equity. The objectives of education do not take cognizance of the society's needs and do not adequately indicate future direction. The absence of interrelated contents and mode of presentation that can develop students' knowledge, cognitive abilities and behavioral change by level, to adequately enrich problem-solving ability and attitude, are some of the major problems of our education system. Inadequate facilities, insufficient training of teachers, overcrowded classes, shortage of books and other teaching materials, all indicate the low quality of education provided. The gross participation rate of the primary education was below 22% of the relevant age cohort. Of these, a large number discontinues and relapse is high. Illiteracy is an overall problem of the society. Opportunities for high school education and technical and vocational training are limited to big towns. Higher education institutions are found only in very few regions, they are overcrowded and their research capacity is very low. The necessary infrastructure to provide relevant quality education to the rural population, which is over 85% of the population of the country, was at an insignificant level of development. Aware of the complex problems the country has plunged in by the previous dictatorial, self-centered and vain regimes, the transitional government of Ethiopia has embarked on charting the right direction of development to break the vicious circle we have been entangled in. Education, as a very important factor to human development, is of a high priority in the overall development endeavor of the government. Hence, it requires an appropriate direction to set a new process in motion and change the alarming situation. For this, a comprehensive education and training policy formulated. The policy encompasses overall and specific objectives, implementation strategies, including formal and non-formal education, from kindergarten to higher education and special education. It emphasizes the development of problem-solving capacity and culture in the content of education, curriculum structure and approach, focusing on the acquisition of scientific knowledge practicum. Along with this, it directs that there be appropriate nexus between education, training, research and development through coordinated participation among the relevant organizations. The policy incorporates the structure of education in relation to the development of students' profile, educational measurements and evaluation, media of instruction and language teaching at various levels, the recruitment, training, methodology, organization, professional ethics and career development of teachers. Due attention is also given to the provision and appropriate usage of educational facility technology, materials, environment, organization and management so as to strengthen the teaching-learning process and expansion of education. The evaluation of a decentralized, efficient and professionally coordinated participatory system is indicated in respect of administration and management of the education system. It is also stated that the financing of education be just, efficient and appropriate to promote equity and quality of education. Overall, the education and training policy envisage bringing up citizen endowed with human outlook, country-wide responsibility and democratic value, having developed the necessary productive, creative and appreciating capacity in order to participate fruitfully in development and the utilization of resources and the environment at large. Summary: the types of changes in curriculum include plan change, coercion, interaction change, substitution, alteration, perturbation, restricting, and value orientation changes. People's resistance to curriculum change can be attributed to factors such as inertia, insecurity, rapidity of change can be knowledge, and lack of support. Receptivity to curriculum change can be improved by making the curriculum activity more cooperative. Preparing procedures that make the implementation process easier, making people to realize that all programs will be reviewed to determine if they should be continued and by using proper timing. The success or failure of the newly developed curriculum can be determined by evaluation and then measure can be taken based on the result. Formative and summative evaluations are the two major types of evaluation in which the former can be used to improve an existing program, whereas the latter is concerned with evaluating the overall program after implementation. The instruments of evaluation include standardized test, teacher-made tests, work samples, oral tests, systematic observation, interviews, questionnaires, checklists and rating scales, anecdotal records, sociograms and self-report. Validity and reliability are the criteria to be utilized in checking whether an evaluation instrument is proper or not. In Ethiopia, traditional education has played a great role in the development of modern education and on the transmission of cultural heritage to the new generation. Indigenous education is an education which is offered by all ethnic groups with the aim of conveying cultural elements to the young generation. Indigenous education in Ethiopia includes church education, that is Orthodox church education, and Quranic Islamic education. The four major structures in church education are Nabab Bet, Zima Bet, Kain Bet, and Matshaf Bet. Quranic education has four structures such as Majlis Quran, Fiqh, Nahawiyah and Tafsir Quran. The development of modern education in Ethiopia was influenced by France, Italy, Britain and America. The new educational structure of Ethiopia constitutes basic, general higher and specialized education on formal and non-formal bases. The core overall strategies of the new education and training policy of Ethiopia includes the curriculum, educational structure, educational measurement and evaluation, teachers, language and education, educational support inputs, educational organization and management, and educational finance.